Hi, good morning. Who is our host today?
Good morning, it's Matthew.
Oh, hi. Thanks so much. I just seen a comment in the chat that one of our lecturers needs to be upgraded to a panelist. Could you please assist her?
Will do so.
Thank you so much. Yes, students, we have about 2 more minutes to go, and thank you for all the good mornings in the chat. It's always great to meet with you. And hopefully we've had a good B-week session, and hopefully you've had a lot of psychological reflection, but we are going to be discussing a few things today. I see that there is a comment from a student saying that they are excited for today. Fantastic. Thank you for the positive spirit. We do appreciate it. And that's really the spirit that really encourages us as lecturers. So let's hope that we meet up to your excitement. Okay, so while we are waiting, like I said, I think we have just less than 2 minutes to go. As Mrs. Padiachi has rightly stated in the chat, she says, so good to hear positive attitude equals positive results. Yes, I would definitely agree. And we will be speaking about systems thinking today. So a positive mindset really can actually have a positive influence on an entire system. So let's see if we can put some of these theories to the test. Okay, so while we are waiting, now 1 more minute to go for a few of our panelists and other students to join. I just wanted to re-emphasize the point of our various sessions and where we are going. So please be reminded that in these lecture sessions, it's really a space for us to provide a scaffold to theory. So when I'm meaning scaffold, we will get to this in Vygotsky, but it's really a starting point to understanding theory, to get the discussion going, to get your thought processes going. So it's very important for you to reflect on these sessions. And when we address the tutorials, that's really a space for you to apply theory to particular questions. And the more you practice the skill of applying theory, the more you will practice the assessment standards that will be covered in your various assessment tasks. So it's important for you to really, in these sessions, engage. So via the different platforms, the more you engaged, the more you will remember information, the more you are then becoming an active participant, and we really want to encourage active participation. So please follow the instructions online, and please be reminded that those tutorials are really a space for you to engage with theory. So please also be reminded that this Friday, it's going to be a little bit different, because we are going to be having a face-to-face contact tutorial session. The preparation that you need to cover for this tutorial has already been posted online. I will send reminders the day before to just remind you of what we're going to be covering in the session. So please book your slots. There will be limited availability. But the session will still, it's my understanding that the session will be recorded. So just because I'm elected to be the guinea pig, I said that I'm happy to record my session, because I do have quite a large venue. So if any students are unable to attend, there will still be a recording, but we would really advise attending the live session so that we can engage with one another in a very real manner. As much as these online sessions are fantastic, and I've been really impressed by the level of your engagement and insight that's been shared on the chat and in the Q&A, there's something different that happens when we meet in face-to-face. So we really do encourage that, and we encourage you to make those bookings if this is something that you believe will be something that will help you. And we do hope that you feel comfortable to come, but if you don't feel comfortable, there will also be a recording, and there will be platforms online to engage with one another. At the moment, some of our forums and platforms are looking a little bit lonely and sad because there has not been a lot of interaction, but I have seen that many of you seem to be engaging with the self-reflective questionnaires, and I am going to be sharing some of those responses today in the session. So please, I encourage you to engage with these platforms. So particularly online tutorial 1, I have seen that with the self-reflective questions, I think the last time I checked, there were 37 responses. There's over 300 of us, so please keep going with that. I just wanted to quickly point out something. So I did say in this beginning of the session, we would quickly go through just a few key points from that tutorial, because I've realized that some students are perhaps a little bit confused. So I'm going to quickly share my screen. And then just colleagues, if anything comes up in the chat, please bring it to my attention, and we will cover things, but we don't want to spend too much time on this. Okay, so I'm going to quickly share the tutorial handout. You should all be familiar with this handout. Hopefully you have been working through it, but I just wanted to point out that really what we are doing with this particular tutorial. So there were a few emails that I got. So for some reason, I don't know why, principals seem to throw students off. They say, I don't know what a principal is. I don't think I quite understand what needs to be done. Basically, what we are looking at here is we are getting you to look at the reflective questions on page 12 of your textbook. And this table really helps you to kind of jot down key notes, key ideas about important factors or understanding of a particular theory. So you can do this obviously by going through your readings, going through your notes, but really what we want you to do here is to identify the key understanding of a theory. Whenever we talk about a principle of a theory, it's those core assumptions. So what are the factors and forces that affect and shape behavior? And each theory will have a very different understanding around this. So please complete this, because this will be a table that you can keep coming back to. And then what we are encouraging you to model here, these are a few questions from that page 12 of your textbook. And really what we want you to do is practice the skill of responding to an application question from a particular perspective. So how you need to do this is you need to go back to the kind of comments that you made about the theory. You need to say, what are these key factors? What are the key principles? How can I use that knowledge then to respond to a question? So I have been seeing a few responses in the self-reflective questionnaire, which are quite general. You need to be very specific to the theory. So keep coming back to those self-reflective questions. Keep updating this information and complete this, because it's really requiring you to practice the skill of taking a theory, the ideas from a theory, and applying it to a question. And I am aware that some of the questions ask you to go beyond the classroom. So there's a question that asks you to kind of focus on the perspective of a psychologist. A lot of the times we're looking at social forces, but we must always remember that the child is a product of these forces. So as much as we try to just focus on the classroom, we need to look at what's going on in the society that surrounds us. And hopefully these are things that will interest you. Okay, so you do not need to submit anything. However, you can complete the self-reflective questionnaire. It just, I think a lot of the times it forces students to do this. However, if you'd like to print this, take down your own notes. The whole point is that we're really encouraging you to practice the skill of applying theory to various questions. So that's the skill. And in future tutorials to come, we might come back to some of these questions, but please complete them. Please read through your textbook, read through your notes, make them relevant, and practice the skill, because you will find that when you come to the actual test questions and even the assignment, you will find that actually these notes that you've created are really helpful. So we really do encourage you to do that. However, we will not be checking to see that you have done it. It's important for you to basically take ownership and practice the skill. So I hope that that makes sense. Also, this is really a platform for you to self-reflect and self-engage, and we are just kind of guiding you in the right direction. So we will be discussing some of these in future tutorials to come, but for now, please engage. There have only been, I think, like I say, 37 self-reflective responses online. Please do that and use the forums that are available to share and engage and build on one another's responses. Okay, so that's all I wanted to say on that. I hope that that becomes clear. In tomorrow's session, we will be doing another online tutorial together, but this will be a sort of facilitated online tutorial with everybody. I'll be explaining that today. And then on Friday, we will do individual sessions with your various campus groups. So yes, the next session is on Thursday. Yes, I am aware. Sorry, I don't know if I said something else, but when I see you again on Thursday, then this is when we will be doing the online tutorial. So hopefully you can build on a lot of ideas from today. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen again. Let's hope that this works. Let me just see. Okay. Is everybody seeing the ecosystemic thinking lectures?
If we can see your screen clearly.
Thank you so much, Naresh. Appreciate it. Okay, excellent. Okay, let me just start the slideshow. Okay, thanks, students. So just to remind you of the processes, so feel free to engage with one another in the chat. The lecturers will be facilitating the chat, but also remember that the chat is a space for you to, as the name suggests, chat, discuss, engage. I will be addressing any questions in the Q&A, so you can also post that there. And then we will save the chat and we might address specific things that come up. But please feel free to use that chat. Like I say, it's been really quite fascinating for me to really see all your engagement and responses, and it's been really wonderful. So let's keep that alive. Okay, so we started this discussion last time I saw you, but I am also aware that our first week, I think we really tried to cram a lot into it. So I will be unpacking a few things. And you will notice that the first week we really do cover the most. So if you think if you felt a sense of being quite overwhelmed by all the incoming information, it's really to just provide that scaffold, that base, and you'll see that we'll keep coming back to specific ideas that were covered. So remember, when we are thinking of systems thinking, and this idea of systems thinking and an ecosystem is going to be very important for your assignment. And it really is the heart of Bronfenbrenner's theory. So for this point, for this stage in preparation for your assignment, we really want you to get a good understanding of theory. And to get a good understanding of Bronfenbrenner's theory, we need to start with this idea of systems thinking and understanding that the individual is this whole being that's made up of various different dimensions. So as we are covering this particular section on systems thinking, my intention is to provide you with a framework of understanding. We are going to be introducing you to important terminology, but at this point, we would really just like you to engage with the theory. So on the various platforms, engage, share your responses, and we can build on one another's feedback and responses together. Okay, so just to kickstart this conversation, when I was going through the peer responses from questionnaire 1, which really looked at those kind of general questions about psychology, I was very impressed by the responses, but I just wanted to point out these 2 responses. I haven't attached the students' names, but what I was really impressed about these responses, and this was that response to the question where I asked you, why is psychology important from a emotional or subjective perspective, or an objective and academic perspective? And these were some of the responses that came up. And why I wanted to share these with you today is that both of these ideas are acknowledging this notion that in order to teach this child in your future classrooms, you need to be aware of what is going on around the child. And the child is basically impacted by things that happen in the family system, by things that happen in the surrounding environment. And they were really good responses. It's not to say that these were the best responses, although these are still obviously very good responses. I think what I wanted to point out here is that both these responses are actually referring to these systematic ideas of systems theories. So as the name suggests, as human beings, we are impacted by systems around us. And at this point, these students were actually basically thinking ahead. And this really just goes to show how important it is to critically reflect. And the more you do that, the more internalized the theory will become. And when I talk about something as being internalized, you begin to understand this from a personal perspective. And both of these responses were really good. I thought they were very thought-provoking. They were very engaged in why psychology is important from both an emotional and quite a personal perspective, and then from an academic perspective too. So when we are thinking of systems, I want you to keep thinking of, sorry about that, we still have some, I think this is going to happen a lot. I'm very sorry, students, but hopefully it's not too frustrating your side. I was hoping that the drilling would stop. There is still some reconstruction going on in the flat next door, unfortunately. So let's hope that my voice can drown out the sound of the drill. But anyway, back to the focus. So whenever we're thinking of psychological theories, always think of how these theories connect. Once again, that idea of the puzzle pieces, and keep making it personally relevant and keep up with these critical reflections, because a lot of the times, the more you critically reflect, you might find that theories actually speak to those critical reflections. Okay, so for this lecture, these are going to be our specific outcomes. So like I say, I want to provide systems thinking and introduction, so that you can, on a lot of the times the learners in our classroom, it's important for us to engage with human development and human interaction. So we're looking at not just the development of the child in the classroom, we are looking at the development of all human behavior. And that's really where our assignment comes in, because for some of you, when you might have seen the case studies for the assignment, you might have thought that these are developing adults, but we are requiring you to look at the different factors and forces which actually shaped these adults in question into their sort of successful development. So you need to look at various aspects of their childhood, of their surrounding environment, how this influenced them positively, how this influenced them negatively, and how this impacted behavior. So when we are covering this section, and when we are covering Bronf and Brenner's section as well, we would like to encourage you to self-reflect. because we are all shaped holistically by various systems as South Africans. And it's important for you to always self-reflect and self-engage. And the more you do this, the more it will become internalized and you will be able to apply these theories. Then for the next time I see you, which will be the session on Thursday, we will take a lot of these theories and we are going to apply it to the case study of Philip. So this is going to be the first case study that we are going to look at, and it's going to model a lot of the skills that will be important for your assignment. So I have put up a folder for the case study. And I will be sharing these notes so you can also then access the link directly to this case study. But for the next time I see you, please just read through the case study and try to make connections about what is happening in this child's life and what is impacting him holistically. But we will get to a lot of these theories today. So we're going to provide a theoretical framework, and then tomorrow we hope that you have some time to read through the case study. You then can make your own kind of inferences, important details about what you think is happening in this case study, how it might relate to some systems thinking. And then when we take that prior knowledge, we will then extend it to understanding Bronfenbrenner's theory. So complete these different steps and you will find hopefully that you enjoy the process of analyzing this particular case study. And in analyzing the case study, we do hope that you will develop a greater appreciation and knowledge of theories. Okay, so firstly, to begin this discussion of systemic thinking and ecosystemic thinking, we should know that if we think back to our first week, a lot of the times the terminology from these approaches and theories that we're going to be looking at, it's important to look at the root word. So when we're talking about ecosystemic thinking, we do hope that you are thinking of the root word ecosystem. And ecosystem is defined by Biology Online as a naturally functioning system where all living organisms from plants to animals function within this environment as an integrated unit. Okay, and at this point, what comes to mind when we are thinking of an ecosystem? Any thoughts that we have about this idea of any sort of elaboration that we want to have, an explanation of this idea of a naturally functioning system? Does anything spring to mind from what we perhaps looked online, if some of us are perhaps a little bit ahead and we've looked at stuff online? Okay, so I see in the chat, Lauren mentions a balance of life and function. Okay, excellent. Yes, anything else? Q&A or the chats? Okay, excellent. I think, Lauren, you're on the right track. When we talk about everything as being balanced, we are recognizing that one effect in the one area will offset that delicate balance. Anything else that we have? Anybody else thinking of that little video clip that I gave you of the Lion King? Did anybody take a trip down memory lane and watch the little video clip? So I see there's comments from Matthew saying, is the ecosystem to explain how, describes how the mind works. So Matthew, we will get to that. But basically, in order to understand the mind, the person, we need to look at all these different systems that surrounds them. And how does that then affect them? So Paige mentions all systems working hand in hand. Georgia mentions a place where organisms live together with their resources. And Longile mentions interactions of living organisms and their physical environment. Okay, so Did anybody watch the little video clip, just as an example?
Chip, we have a nice response to me. She says, an example I can think of is a pond. The water feeds the plants feed the herbivores, and the herbivores feed the carnivores. All of this happens without external intervention, that the environment regulates and sustains itself.
Beautiful, Tumi. You definitely understand that concept. Thank you, Tumi. And I think that that's a really good way of explaining it. And now I wanted to try get to that as well, because that concept of everything being balanced, everything being interconnected in quite a circular manner is explained in The Lion King, from that scene where Mufasa is explaining his philosophy of the circle of life to Simba. And I'm not going to recreate it because I do not have James Earl Jones's magnificent voice. But essentially what he does, Mufasa says, is that we are all connected in this delicate balance. And then Simba says, no, but Dad, we eat the antelope. And then Mufasa says, well, when we die, our bodies become the grass, and antelope eat the grass. And we are all thus connected in the great circle of life. So a lot of wisdom to be learned in Disney movies. And really what that shows is how everything is interconnected. So very much building on to me, like what you've said, the herbivores eat the grass, the carnivores eat the herbivores, but then when the herbivores die, when the carnivore dies, their body decomposes, and that then fertilizes the soil and the grass grows. So everything exists in this delicate balance and circular system. Okay, and then Makoba says, I think of symbiotic relationships. Yes, and I think that's a really fascinating topic, and it's links directly to this, because when we're talking about things as being in a symbiosis, there's synergy in the system, and the system is working functionally. If there is not a symbiotic relationship, if there's kind of this like parasitic relationship where the one is taking advantage of the other, whatever the case might be, then that's when there is a breakdown within a particular ecosystem. But we will get onto that topic. At this point, I just wanted to provide a little link, and you can go watch it and take a trip down memory lane in your childhood about this concept. So I think it's described quite wonderfully in The Lion King, and I just love The Lion King as well. So any chance to share that with you. But what we are seeing with this little clip, and I hope that you go back and you rewatch it, there's a lot of systemic thinking that's being explored in the circle of life. So now what I'd like you to do is to think of systems that you exist within. So now a lot of us, we've been talking about a particular ecosystem. Obviously, I think a lot of us now hopefully are thinking back to The Lion King and thinking of the circle of life and how this relates to the systemic idea of everything being circular and cyclically dynamic. So when I talk about something as being circular, there's no kind of linear progression, very much like if we look at, the lion dies, body decomposes, the antelope eats the lion, and that then creates this cycle. So can we think of any systems that you as a human being exists within? Think of the systems in your daily life that impacts you. And then think about how we're shaped by these systems. Any thoughts that we might have about this? The systems that we interact within. I see there's some comments coming through in the chat. Nareshni, are you
Yes, I am just getting on it. So most of them are alluding to the economy and the fact that
Okay.
we make money and spend money. We have a response from Neka. She states our parents. So that's about all we have at the moment.
Excellent. And really good examples there, students. When we're talking about the economy, that's a sort of really broader, and we will be talking about it when we come to Brown from Brenner's theory, but it's what we refer to as in the macro system. So it surrounds us. It has an influence on us, but it's surrounding us within the broader society. But then that other response from a student mentioning family, that's more of what we would refer to as a macro system. So it's things that impact us directly on a daily basis. So yes, those are definitely system.
We do
Yes.
have more responses coming in. So there's more about family, friends, school, work, social economic systems, family relationships and roles, education to gain knowledge and skills. So we have a question from Nirvana, and she says, could the fight against COVID be considered a system? So that's a question. And then I think Tumi also has a good response here. She talks about the family system. She says, I was raised by my grandmother. She provided for me, which exposed me to the financial system and exposed me to the schooling system. And it all came full circle when I became old enough to teach and take care of my grandmother. And then Nabila says, I see our religion as a system that shapes our way of thinking and impacts how we behave and the morals we possess. Also, we have another response from Halala that says the law, which we as humans make and then follow. And then Lauren says the system of food, from the processing to the cultivating and even to the consumption. So that's all about that we have right now.
Yes, excellent. Thank you, students. I'm so impressed by your responses. Really insightful, really engaging. And what's so interesting is that each one of you are looking at the various different systems. So I want you to think about these examples. And then when we come to Bronfman Brenner's theory, you can see, okay, which system, according to this theory, does this fit into? But coming back to that interesting question about can we see the fight against COVID as a system? Most definitely, I would say so, because we all have different values around how we fight COVID. So we're living in such an interesting time. And as educational psychology students and students who are learning these psychological theories, you can understand why some people are perhaps reluctant to get the vaccine. There's various factors and forces around that. People have different values and ideas around that. Also, it's really interesting, this notion of human rights. And we will get to that in Kohlberg's theory, because there's even, some people who believe that this, the idea of wearing a mask actually infringes on people's human rights. And as sort of educational psychology students, we want you to be in a position where instead of judging people, I mean, we all have our own informed opinions, of course. And for a lot of us, it's quite clear cut about what's right and what's wrong and what's moral and what's immoral. But it's important to try and understand, well, why do people make these decisions? What is happening in their system that is influencing them to think this way? So yes, I would definitely say the fight against COVID can be seen as a system. And in fact, what we are seeing with COVID is how interconnected the world actually is. Because if I think back to obviously over a year ago, I think it was about February, March, when that first case came to Durban, where we are. And I remember being quite, I think, ignorant about it. I was under the impression that we would not be affected. It was like this terrible thing that was happening in China, but we were so far removed from it. And, obviously here we are in these online teaching spaces. So we see how interconnected everything is. So something like COVID has actually affected and changed all kinds of systems, particularly the education system. So yes, students, thank you so much for your insights. And I keep wanting you to think about this, because I think that the more challenges we experience, the better it is to understand those challenges through a psychological lens. It really does help to kind of understand what motivates human behavior rather than judging a person. It's important to take a step back and try to understand it from a greater systemic perspective. So I see you all on the right track in the chat. So thank you so much. And also, what I want you to think about at this point is when we talk about the systems as shaping us, please always remember that we as individuals can actually affect change on a system. So we're going to come to that. But as much as we are shaped and influenced, we also shape and influence the surrounding environments. So even think about yourselves as being participants and engaging in the chat. You are affecting change within this learning system that we have, this online learning system. So you are an active participant, and the more you actively participate, the more you are learning and other people are learning from you. So we are very much in a system now, and obviously we're just in a very privileged space to be able to do this online and have these technologies that are available to us. But keep up with these reflections. Yes.
If I could just chip in a little bit and just reflecting back to that question on COVID, I'm just thinking about when the president put us in lockdown level 5, you know, how we had to really work together to curb the spread. I mean, if I wasn't doing my part, then it was going to obviously impact the next person. And I think we all needed to work together to obviously stop that curve. Or the numbers from increasing. So definitely we can look at, you know, the whole prevention and the spreading as us working as a system, because I mean, all of us, all our actions impact each other. So I would definitely see it as a system. So thank you for that. That was actually a good question. And I think you really applied it so well to the current context, which is actually nice. And I think we need more questions like that.
Yes, thank you, students. So please be these active participants, ask these questions. We can then provide a safe space to grow and learn together. And yeah, look at all these experiences that we are going through. And I think it's important for you to reflect on it. I had such a wonderful email from a student, a distance learning student from the last semester, where when there was the social unrest that was happening, and she said she was so grateful for psychology because she could understand it from a psychological lens. So it really helped her kind of process through what was going on because she was understanding it, and she wasn't just in a sort of judgmental place. She was trying to look at all the systems. How did this come to be? So we're not going to tackle that today. I don't think we'll have time, but keep thinking of these things, and we want you to be socially conscious of what's going on around us, and that makes you obviously a good human being, of course, but also I would say a really good teacher. So keep making these connections and keep reflecting on theory from a personal perspective. So thank you so much, students. Really appreciate it. Okay, so now we're going on to looking at the different systems. The most important thing when we are looking at different systems, well, maybe not the most important thing, but one of the most important things is the individual who we will see as being as the center of a particular system. So when you get to self-reflecting on the case study of Philip, which is available online, we would like to encourage you to reflect on this visual depiction of this holistic function of a human being. So the Wheel of Life basically provides this visual depiction of the different dimensions that make up an individual. So in order to understand the individual, and we want you to, particularly when you're looking at the case study of Philip, or even now if you want to self-reflect, kind of, put yourself in the middle here. So kind of write down your name. Or obviously you can't be writing down your name, but mentally think about yourself here and how your behavior and you as a person is shaped by all these different factors and forces. So we have a physical dimension, what is physically going on. We have an emotional dimension. So think about the connection of self, your sort of feelings. Then we have a social dimension. Think about the interaction with your social environment, interaction with peers. Then we have intellectual cognitive dimension. So we think here of thought processes, knowledge, understanding. Then we have our spiritual dimension here. And a lot of the times that relates to morality. It relates to our religious beliefs, our values. But all of these things, in order to understand a person, we need to consider them as being interconnected. So when we're looking at a person, we aren't just focusing on one dimension. So a lot of the times, if you think of yourself as a teacher, a lot of teachers focus on the physical and intellectual dimension. But as a self-aware teacher, you need to consider that the individual, the child in question, even yourself, you're made up of various different dimensions. So a child cannot be developing cognitively if we are ignoring their emotions, if we are ignoring those kind of feelings that they are displaying in the behavior, which is indicating something about what is going on perhaps in the home space. And the whole point about this visual depiction is that we really want you to think of that idea of the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. So when we are considering an individual under focus, we need to consider all these various different dimensions. And as we progress with psychology, each of the theories that we're going to be looking at will focus on different dimensions. So for instance, when we are looking at Bronfenbrenner's theory, he tries to combine all of these different dimensions to try and understand a person. However, other theories will focus on specific dimensions. So we're going to get to Vygotsky and Piaget, which focuses on this intellectual dimension. We're going to get to Carl Rogers, which focuses on this emotional dimension. And then we're also going to get to learning theories, which focuses on physical and social dimension. And then we'll also get to Kohlberg, which focuses on the spiritual dimension. But for now, I don't want to overwhelm you with too much information. Just, I want you to remember that concept or idea of the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. So please, when we are encountering that case study, when we are thinking of ourselves, think of all these different parts of who we are and how they actually affect us holistically. Okay, so now what I would like to do, yes, Tasneem.
Hi, how are you? I just want to, one of the students has put a really nice, explanation here, and just going back to the wheel, that holistic approach, and it exactly speaks to what I wanted to say, that every part is interconnected. And Lauren says when one dimension is thrown off balance, then all the dimensions can be affected, which leads to a person feeling that they have lost control. So it's a great example to show that, as a teacher, to be aware of many aspects. And as you say, we are made up of more than just one thing. So the child might be performing well in certain areas, but other areas, perhaps home or social, may be impacted. And as a result, you'll find that there are various challenges. So thank you for this comment, Lauren. And I think that the students have really given us a good understanding of this wheel of life. Thank you, Trevlin.
Thank you, Tasneem. And I think that's, thank you so much for building on that student's response. So Lauren, thank you for that. I think that you've also touched on a really excellent point there. When we are as teachers thinking of the child's behavior in the classroom, it's important to try to understand that behavior. And we might all be human beings. We might sometimes get easily frustrated by negative behaviors that the child is displaying in the classroom, but we need to really try to get to a point of understanding. What is this behavior perhaps communicating about what is going on in a particular dimension? And obviously, you are going to be teachers, so you can only make informed sort of assumptions about this. You can only make informed ideas about what might be happening. And a lot of the times you need to make those connections. And that's why it's so important to have those parent-teacher meetings so that you don't jump to incorrect assumptions. Either way, it's important to be informed. And when you are seeing an issue or a problem, it's important to then refer the child on to a counselor, a social worker, or a psychologist. But either way, it's important for you to pick up what might these behaviors be communicating. And that's really where the partnership comes in. But we will be exploring all of this towards the end of the year, where we're going to be looking at counseling. So thank you so much, students. I'm really impressed at how insightful your responses are. I know I keep saying that, but I just want to emphasize how wonderful I think it is. Okay, so now building on what you have been saying, and I'm fairly certain that in the chat you are recognizing these key terms. So keep coming back to using the important terminology, the important theoretical terminology. So when we are talking about systems thinking, we are looking at circular or cyclical interactions in nature. And when we are talking about something that's interconnected, an image that should come to mind is that of a spider web, where everything is very intricately woven. And I want you to kind of use this as a visual metaphor for understanding the systems that us human beings interact within. And when we're looking at Bronfenbrenner's theory, a lot of the times the focus here is on the impact of the child within that system, but there's also this impact of how the system changes over time. And that's always really exciting for me, because that really suggests that if we implement effective strategies, then we can actually help create a positive system. So the change in the one part of the system, if everything's circular, a positive impact in one part of the system will have this beautiful ripple effect on the system. Of course, the opposite is also true. So the offset in one part of the system might offset the entire system. And that's why it's very important to think of everything globally, think of everything holistically. As much as we might see a particular behavior in a classroom space, perhaps we might incorrectly label the child as being a delinquent in the classroom. Perhaps this might be speaking to a broader issue. And that's really where, as teachers, we need to come to understand a behavior. Where does this behavior stem from? And when we are looking at systems thinking, there's this reoccurring idea, and you will read it in your course reader, that nothing happens in a vacuum. And what this means is that nothing is random. The behavior, we need to understand it as being a part of a larger system. So the more we start to think about that, the more we'll begin to understand ourselves, we begin to understand our child in the classroom. And obviously we are going to be modeling this within the case study of Philip. Okay, another key term that I want us to utilize when we are thinking of this theory is this ripple effects as a holistic concept. And a lot of you in the chat were referring to this. And obviously, within an ecosystem, it's really important to think of the ripple effects. So everything has this circular cause and effect chain. So we have to, if we are looking at one problem in a system, we need to look at where does this stem from? Where is this rooted in? And that's really important for you as a teacher, and for you as a teacher who thinks from a psychological perspective. We need to look at what is happening holistically and where do the ripple effects come in. If there is a problem, how can I have a positive ripple effect on this child's system? How can I then affect change within my classroom, which is also a system in its own rights? So all of these things really important, but keep thinking back to these ripple effects. Okay, then this concept, I think, has actually come about quite a lot in the chat. That makes me quite excited, because that might suggest that you have done your readings. Alternatively, you might just be really brilliant, which I'm sure you are. But either way, when we're talking about interdependence, and this is not to be confused by independence. What is the difference? Can anybody help us? The difference between independence and interdependence. And we will be coming back to the example of COVID, which you have already actually discussed, because you are just so ahead. But what do we think? What's the difference between independence and interdependence?
Trev, we do have quite a lengthy response from Tumi, which says, talks about the spider web, and she says this can be reflected in how a positive change in a child's home life, such as a parent getting a job or being removed from an abusive environment, can cause a positive change in the child's attitude and performance at school. The teacher didn't change anything, but one of the systems in the child's life falling into balance affects that system. We also have another response from Halala that says interdependence is depending on one another. Matthews talks about partnership, and we have Bads here that talks about independence, self-sufficiency, and interdependence being codependent on other factors or people. And we have Ashley who says independence is not relying on other people and being self-reliant, while interdependence is relying on one another. So I think that about captures the difference between the two.
Excellent. Thank you so much for reading out those responses. Yes, students, you are almost correct. Tumi, thank you so much for that observation of how it's so important to look at what happens in the various systems. I think, Tumi, you are really going to enjoy Bronfenbrenner's theory, because it speaks directly to those ideas. We are going to be building on that. Then, as all the peers who participated in the chat, thank you for that. You are almost correct. When we are looking at things being interdependent, we are looking at the connections. Okay, when we talk about something as being interdependent, it's interconnected. We need to understand as human beings that we are social. So in order to understand an individual person, we need to look at who is in their social circle. How does that then affect their behavior? So when we're looking at systems thinking, the focus is not on the individual who stands alone. There's this idea that the individual is shaped and influenced by various factors in the various social environments, from even a sort of local or national perspective to even a global and international perspective. As I think we have already acknowledged, when we are looking at this COVID pandemic that we are in, we are seeing how interconnected the world actually is. Because if you think back to 2 years ago, this idea of walking around wearing a mask, this is seen as, you know, something that actually is protecting other people. We wouldn't have been able to believe it, but now that's become our new system. This just is something that we've all had to adapt and change to. And even when I go to the schools to go assess students for teaching practice, when I see the little learners with, you know, the masks on, it does make my heart a little bit sore, but ultimately it's, you know, obviously for the good. And I think we all can acknowledge that, but it's so interesting how one something that happened in China, because the world is so interconnected, has now affected us in South Africa and has affected the world, has taken over the world. So really interesting to see how psychology is playing out and how these theories are coming to life. Okay, so now building on these ideas, these core concepts that we've already looked at of circular, when we talk about something as being circularly dynamic, so it's influenced by circular forces. We're looking at various systems, this idea that everything is interconnected and there are ripple effects on the whole. All of these key ideas, and you've all spoken about them really beautifully, unpacked them really wonderfully in the chat. Thank you so much for that. This all speaks to the core principles or core understanding or assumptions of this ecosystemic perspective. Okay, so all these ideas that we are looking at are basically like the building blocks, the key terms for this theory. But where this theory developed, and it's noted in your reading, is this idea of everything being interconnected, and in order to understand a human being, we need to look at these various connections in various parts of their life. We need to not just focus on what's immediately apparent in the family circle. We need to look at what's happening in the neighborhood, in the broader community, what is happening in broader society, what's even happening in the global world. All of this actually affects behavior. So they take these ecological and systems theory and they applied it to understanding human behavior. And when we talk about this ecosystemic perspective, and this is what separates this notion from this behaviorist perspective, because you will likely remember from the behaviorist perspective that behavior is shaped by outside forces. But what the ecosystemic also takes into consideration is the internal person. So your personality, you know, we are all born with specific aptitudes. We are all born with specific strengths and weaknesses. We all have specific personality traits, whether that can be genetically a response from genetics, or whether it's a response from the environment, we will be discussing in Friday's lecture. But what is noticed here in this ecosystemic perspective is that because everything exists within a system, you as an individual can actually change a system that you interact within. So you are not just passively shaped by these external forces, you can actually affect change. So in this theory, the individual is referred to as both the agent, so you can be an agent of change, and you are also the one person that's influenced. So really interesting to see how you are shaped by the outside forces, by various circumstances, but you then obviously affect change as well. So I want you to, at this point, even think of your participation here. A lot of the times your responses in the chat, you know, encourage us to unpack something. It steers the conversation in a particular direction because you are actually an agent. You are a active participant, and thus you have a particular role within this live learning event. So really interesting to see that, and you'll notice how it builds on that behaviorist concept of looking at the surrounding environment. But we also need to focus on this individual who can be empowered and can offset and affect the system. And this is also where we talk about things as being interdependent. So we need to look at the different directions in which the influence go. And we talk about this as being bi-directional. So when we talk about something as being bi-directional, what do we think we mean if we break down the word bi-directional? Can we break down the words? Bi meaning two, directional obviously meaning direction. Can we put those two concepts together? And what do we think that this is suggesting about systems? Bi-directional. Okay, well, think about it. I'm sure it's probably already come up in the chat, But this idea, bidirectional, two directions, think how this is important within a systems thinking.
Trev, we do have a response from Tumi. She says that the system can work both ways. We have another response that states, is it a two-way street or functioning in two directions?
Excellent. And here the drilling starts again. C, nothing happens in a vacuum. Anyway. Hope it'll finish soon. Okay, hopefully you can hear me. Okay, so we are looking at the interconnections, interdependence. So really what we're doing here is taking those key terms, the key terminology, and we are seeing how it impacts the system as a whole. Okay, so take these key ideas. Finally. So we take these key ideas and we need to draw on them when we are looking at this particular perspective. Okay, so now we are, okay, I'm going to go through this quite quickly because I think we have already mentioned this. So I'm just taking the key notes, key ideas from the readings about these ecological concepts when we're talking about things existing within a system. Very important for us to look at this idea of how everything exists within this delicate balance, as the circle of life concept from the Lion King suggested. So we need to look at where there is interaction in a system. So if a system is well functioning, there's a lot of the times mutual interaction and cooperation. So even think of a school system, there needs to be mutual interaction and cooperation. Even if we reflect back to that earlier question about, can the fight against COVID be seen as a system? I'm sure a lot of these ideas will come to play, this idea of mutual interaction and cooperation. So there's the individual who's at the center, who essentially has the right to decide, you know, am I going to have the vaccine? Am I not going to have the vaccine? And then that has ripple effects on the whole. Also, as much as the individual can decide whether to wear a mask or not wear a mask, ultimately there's also a law now in place. So that affects behavior. But ultimately, all of these decisions are being implemented, all of these factors and forces for hopefully cooperation to actually, you know, overcome this pandemic that we find ourselves in. So it's a really interesting theory to look at, and I'm sure we are seeing that a lot of people are obviously not obeying specific mandates and specific laws, and we see how that little individual now offsets everybody. And also, I mean, if we really come back to it as well, if we're looking at this idea of the individual who can offset a system, that, you know, patient X from Wuhan, who's actually, you know, changed the whole world. So that idea that one person can't change the world, I think, has been effectively debunked. But when we're looking at systems thinking, it's important to look at that. So everything that we are seeing now, we are really seeing psychology in action. Okay, so now that we are looking at these ideas, we would like you to reflect on a food web. Okay, so when we're looking at a food web, we are looking at basically how an ecosystem functions. And I think there was some comments earlier. I think it might have been from Tumi. I'm sure there were other students as well who've looked at this delicate balance of a particular ecosystem. So now if we look at this ecosystem, we have the grasshopper. What would happen in the system if the grasshopper were to become severely poisoned, or if for some reason the grasshopper became extinct? How would this impact the delicate balance of the entire system? So what I'd like you to practice here, so let's try use some of those principles, some of those key terms that we've just looked at. So think about ripple effects, think about interdependence, think about circular causality, this idea of a circular chain of events. Any ideas that we have? What would happen to this delicate balance of the entire system? Any assumptions that we could make about that? And once again, it's just important for us. What I'd like you to do here is really draw on terminology, those ideas, interconnection, ripple effect, all of those concepts. Let's take some time to think about it. I'm actually going to open the Q&A.
We do have a response in the chat from Jessie, and she says that it would create a ripple effect, creating a disturbance to the food web.
Okay, excellent. There would be a disturbance. Excellent, Jessie. Would anybody else like to build on Jessie's response? So there is a disturbance in the delicate balance. What might we then, let's take it one step further. If, let's say, the grasshopper became severely poisoned, what would then happen to this system? Can we explain this disturbance that would happen?
So we do have a response from Nirvana, and she says the plants it specifically eats would overpopulate the area and the frog's diet would be unbalanced.
Okay, excellent. So what's interesting about this, and I want to build on your response, Nirvana, you said the frog would become poisoned, but then it's this whole thing of the frog becomes poisoned, the snake then becomes poisoned, this then, the owl will then become poisoned as well. And then obviously if there's even a breakdown, the decomposure of one of these animals, then that might actually affect the soil as well. So we see how everything, once again, we see how everything exists in this delicate balance. I'm really sorry, students. I do hope that some of you are at least finding this funny, that this drill goes off all the time. But anyway, any thoughts that we have about this further?
So we do have more responses, Trev. So Hasna says the entire system would then be negatively affected. Vad says if the grasshopper became poisoned, those animals eating them would die too. We have another response from Nadia that states it would create conflict between the organisms. There now one less resource. This would negatively affect the ecosystem if the grasshopper goes extinct. And Sandile states this would cause the sunflower to overpopulate the environment. And then Tumi further states the poison would move up the food chain, making the frog, snake, and the owl sick. And if enough grasshoppers get sick and die, the frog might lose an important part of their diet, which may affect the number of frogs, which would affect the food supply for snakes. And then we have Gugu, who says, since everyone, she says, if every animal is interdependent on one another, so it will cause distress on the other animals. It's like how one rotten potato ruins the others. Also, Jessie states this would create an unbalanced ecosystem and food web. And yep, that's about it.
Excellent. Thank you, students. I'm really impressed, and I see that we are effectively using terminology, so please keep up with that. So what each one of you have identified is the impact. So a lot of you were looking at theory, so you're looking at those terminologies and you're moving from the general to the specific. You are saying this is offset the system, we might see this happen in the system. Okay, so that's really important. What you will also notice within a human system is that we can actually make specific inferences as well. And we're going to be seeing that in our case studies. So take these skills that you've developed and think about how this works. So as much as this shows something that's quite dramatic, we see the poison in one area affects the other. But obviously we are seeing this even within the human world, obviously, with this COVID pandemic that we found ourselves in. So keep up with that, keep reflecting on this. And the whole idea, what we are looking for, and you are practicing these skills effectively, is you are taking the theory, the ideas, and you are relating them to the questions under focus. So for us, it's important for you to, firstly, we want to see, do you understand the theory? So you need to start with those core key concepts, core terminology, core principles of the theory. You need to then use that to respond to the question, and you are all doing that quite effectively. So thank you so much for that. Okay, so I'm going to go through this very quickly because I think we have discussed this. So taking it one step further, all those ideas that we have, we will see come to play in this ecosystemic thinking. And when we focus on Bronfenbrenner's theory, I want you to keep coming back to these core concepts. This idea that human behavior is complex, and in order to understand it, we need to look at the relationships that surround a particular individual. We need to consider, where are the dynamic interactions? Where are they happening? What's happening in various parts of the system that is explaining why this individual at the center is successful, why this individual at the center is failing, why this individual at the center is experiencing issues. We need to look at all these different ripple effects. We need to look at, how is this happening in a bidirectional manner? So when, let's say, something in the classroom environment is impacting the child positively, the child then might impact the classroom environment positively. And then we have this beautiful synergy that happens. There's this good positive energy in the classroom space, and everybody's learning together, and there's mutual interconnection, mutual respect, and mutual learning. So it's very important for us to think of these key ideas, but always come back to this notion. This is a core principle of Bronfenbrenner's theory and ecosystemic theory too, is that people are both products of the surrounding environment, and they are producers in that environment. So the person will be affected by the environment, but they can actually affect change in the environment. And keep coming back to this idea of the pandemic that we found ourselves in, where one person has quite literally changed the world. So very important for us to reflect on these. Okay, so now, systems theory, if we're looking at it from a more personal perspective, so let's build on those previous ideas that we have. When we're looking at an individual and specific behaviors, we need to look at how systems function interdependently. So I'd like us to discuss this concept of stress. So stress is something that I think we all have experienced in some part of our lives. Obviously, stress is a construct. It's been defined as a sort of psychological experience. However, when a person is stressed, there are specific markers. It affects different parts of their dimensions. So can we see this? Can we maybe explain this? So if we're looking at stress, which is obviously technically classified as a psychological response to something within the environment, how does that then offset the individual? What dimensions are offset? Is there anybody who's perhaps comfortable to say, okay, when they feel stressed, this is what they feel? Any ideas that we have about that?
Sorry, Trev, a few students were just in the chat saying they are experiencing some issues with it freezing, but I did state to the students that it is recording, so they are most welcome to watch the recording if they do miss anything.
Okay, yes. Thank you, students. Sorry, unfortunately, I think sometimes my internet can be unstable, or it might be your internet that's unstable. We all exist in these systems. We're seeing this theory in action. But yes, and I see there's a Q&A. Will these slides be uploaded onto ECI? Yes, all the slides, all our lecture slides will be uploaded for you to download and use. So please don't feel the need to take everything down, but obviously we encourage you to take down notes. Okay, so let's think back to stress. How can we see stress as being this interdependent process? How does stress offset various dimensions? And try think of it from a personal perspective. Any thoughts that we have? Anything in the chat?
Hi, Trev. There is a response from one of the students of VADS that says, stress decreases productivity and focus. Without focus, one cannot complete work or school-related tasks. Without being able to complete these tasks, either your grades or your livelihood would become affected, and that will have an impact on the microsystems such as the family matter or even greater effects on the community. So I think that's a really lovely response, and applying it through that Bronfenbrenner lens as well. Well done.
Well done. Thank you, Vaz. I think it clearly shows you are completing your Bronfenbrenner readings, which makes us really excited. And what I also like that you are looking at is that, so stress, which is something that can be best described as an emotional experience. So it's a feeling that we have, but what you're also noticing is that it offsets the person's cognitive dimension, their ability to focus. And you also mentioned productivity. So it also affects them physically, where they are sometimes incapable of performing a particular action.
There's also a response from Tumi. So sorry, she says, when I'm stressed, I tend to overthink and underperform, which leads me to doing a lot less than I should be, which can cause more stress. My mom tends to become grumpy and shouts a lot, which makes everybody in the house nervous, and we walk on eggshells around the house. I think that also speaks to that emotional aspect and dimension, as well as the social aspect of how stress can impact individuals and people within your close microsystem. So thank you for that, to me. Lisa says, when I am stressed, my shoulders and neck, so it affects my physical dimension. So she says, so I suppose she's trying to say it gets tense. Then we have one from Sayuri. She says, stress affects your thoughts, feelings, and behavior. Stress can also affect your health. Yes, you can also have psychosomatic symptoms. Those psychological thoughts could manifest in physical symptoms, heart palpitations, anxiety, etc. You're so correct. I love all these responses. I'm going to read one more, Trev, then you can continue.
Thanks so much.
Nirvana. When I feel stressed, I feel overwhelmed and somewhat disconnected, which affects my productivity, which in turn causes more stress. And then I take a step back and a cup of hot chocolate to gain my perspective. So I like that, that you're also thinking about a solution, not just thinking about how I'm stressed, but how can I regain myself and my equilibrium and my balance. So that's lovely. And then lastly, from Santilia, stress often seen as a positive emotion, which could lead to me actually taking action or me further procrastinating.
Excellent. And I think that that's such a good way of looking at it, because there's so many different ways that we can look at stress, because it is something that's part of our daily lives, but when it offsets our dimensions negatively, then obviously that has an effect on us holistically. So I think a lot of you are mentioning, there was the discussion about how the home life is affected. So actually the sort of social dimension, and that will affect your emotional dimension. A lot of students are mentioning how the psychological feeling of stress can actually manifest itself physically. So as Mrs. Kassim mentioned, this idea of psychosomatic symptoms. So that actually shows how important the mind is, because that kind of actually offsets the whole functioning of the body. And we're not going to get into the sort of science around that, but it's really interesting to see even a lot of the times when people are stressed and they're in this fight or flight response, a lot of the times it actually offsets neural pathways. So it can get quite technical, but what we are requiring you to do is really look at how this emotional experience has an impact on the whole. And I think stress is something that we can all relate to. And I'm sure these pictures are maybe a little bit triggering for some of us, but stress is a part of life. And I think the whole point is that we need to embrace it. We need to come up with strategies and solutions. We need to understand ourselves, and we need to look at, well, what is our body communicating to us if everything is interconnected? So this is when we come back to understanding the individual and that systematic thinking of when a system is functioning holistically, when the individual is functioning holistically. So even if you can think of your emotional, physical and spiritual wellness is all interconnected and related. And it's all a byproduct of this bidirectional, two-directional interaction. So we need to always consider us as being holistic. So even something, an example of stress, which is a lot of the times an emotional response to something in the external environment, it manifests itself in specific ways. So this really showcases how important it is to look at the whole and try to look at where the trigger is. Everybody has a root cause for something, and it's important to understand that and uncover that if we are going to be psychologically well. And there's definitely, in this time with this pandemic, there is a push for emotional, psychological, and physical wellness. And that's why it's so important to always, consider, what is my body communicating? How can I offset this? How can I take my power back? Very important to consider stress, because sometimes a lot of us maybe can, if we are perhaps a little bit self-reflective, and I heard that response about procrastination, sometimes that can result in immense stress. But what helps prevent that stress is perhaps working systematically, coming up with a plan of action, attending your lectures and being a part of it, and then feeling, actually, I'm no longer feeling that stressed because I'm doing my bit. All of those kind of things, it's important for you to take control and be that active agent or producer in the environment. Okay, so when we're also looking at systems now, so now when we are focusing on broader systems, I'm sure we are realizing that there's also particular subsystems or kind of smaller inner systems or dimensions that people interact within. But once again, we need to come back to this idea of the whole is dependent on the interaction between the parts. So in order to understand a system, and if we look at a family system, a lot of the times a family system can be made up of subsystems. So it's this idea that everybody in the family has their role to play. And it's always an interesting thing for us to reflect on. What is your role in your family? And how might your family, the role of your immediate family, be impacted by things that happen in the extended family dynamic? And how does that influence you? Any ideas that we perhaps have about this? So even though there is a family, there is sometimes subsystems. There's an extended family. Even in the family, everybody has perhaps their role to play, perhaps their duty to play. And obviously that then changes as people move out of home, as children grow up, their roles change. But now if we're looking at this, I want you to share some of your responses in the chat, but think about how what happens in your extended family impacts you in your immediate family. And also think about this, sometimes what happens in the external family can affect the immediate family, but what has a lot of the time the most effect is what happens immediately in the immediate family. And what I mean by this is because there's daily interactions, you are far more impacted by that than you are by what happens with your external family. Although a lot of the times what we might find happening is that extended family members actually live within the same household. A lot of the times there is, sort of cultures that are now doing that everybody lives within the same kind of ecosystem. So that then shifts and changes the roles. So we need to always consider different factors and forces. So any comments about this, the impact of the immediate and extended family systems? And does anybody want to perhaps elaborate on this? Why do you think that the impact of the immediate family system, why would that perhaps have more of an impact? So let's just think of it as the extended family not living in the same household. Why do you think that there would be more of an impact from the immediate family than the extended family on perhaps an individual? And we can even think of, if we really want to put a face to this theory, you can look at this child who's here surrounded by obviously what seems to be a really loving family. How will that affect the child? I mean, even in this picture, we can already see some kind of assumptions about the body language and about this child. Obviously, we shouldn't be making assumptions, but what do we think? Any ideas that we have? You can self-reflect, think on theory.
Can I perhaps offer something with regards to that, Travelin?
Of course, Tasneem.
Okay, so the family is the primary agent of socialization, as we know. The family is the first place where we learn about the world and relationships around us. The family teaches us how, to interact with people outside our family. And we learn a lot of our, our traits and our values and norms from there. So I think that the impact of the family system is so great when we're looking at psychology as a whole and the individual holistically, that we have to ask questions about how this person or child or student in your class is impacted by his or her family system. This picture looks like a really loving family system. Everybody is, supporting one another, etc. And it's a beautiful, idealistic picture, but it often doesn't happen that way. And often families are different. The landscape of families these days have changed so much as well, with, a number of deaths, child-headed households, etc. So it's also important to look at what type of family system you're dealing with. Thank you so much.
Excellent. Thank you, Tasneem. And I think those are excellent points for students to reflect on. And when we are looking at I think we are almost running out of time. So I think when we are looking at the functioning of the system, that will come in, and you will see how the dynamics of that immediate family actually impacts a child within the case study of Philip. So it is quite a sad case study, but I am sure we will be able to see these systems at play because of what is happening in that immediate family environment. And also it's very important to even think back to, if we are connecting these ideas to previous theories that we've looked at, thinking particularly here the behaviorist perspective and the psychodynamic perspective, which suggests, the psychodynamic theory suggests that those the formative years of a child's life actually sets the stage for their personality formation. So it's really important to consider what is happening in that family space. And as Mrs. Casson said, as much as that's a very idealized picture, and I think a lot of the times you will see, children who are achieving in the school environment, who are confident, a lot of the times that might speak to a secure relationship at home within the family. However, a lot of children do not have a secure relationship within that family system. It's a very insecure and sometimes quite a destructive relationship. And that will then influence the specific behaviors in the classroom. And it's important for us to be able to pick up on those, you know, you will obviously be a teacher, but it's important to pick up on that so you can open the communication channels with parents so that you can be partners within the child's development. Also, it's important for you to sometimes refer onward. A lot of you know, schools will have within their system, there are counselors, there are psychologists, there are social workers, and it's important then for you to be able to know what's happening so you can actually create those networks and pathways. Okay, so I think that that's all we're going to have time for. I think we are running out of time. We will get back to this. I think we've covered most of these key ideas. So when you do go through these notes, I think you will be able to see how everything comes to play. Hopefully, you assembling those puzzle pieces and it's all making sense. But please, when we are thinking of, when we're going to get onto discussing Bronfenbrenner's theory and builds on this biopsychosocial model of human functioning, which looks at the human biology, it looks at human psychology and interactions between the social environment, but it also looks at what's happening in a global perspective and an international perspective and a national perspective. So it's important for us to make these connections. Okay, these notes will be uploaded, and then please can you go and apply this to the case study of Philip. So I'd like you to reflect on these questions for Thursday's session when I'll see you. And really what you are doing is you are taking the theory, but we're going to be applying it to a particular case study. So we are seeing aspects of this theory being coming to life in this case study. We are seeing how various systems are impacting this child's behavior in the classroom space, and we can make a lot of educated responses because of what the information that we have. So read through the case study, think of these ideas that we have. We're going to be building on it. We're going to be reflecting on Bronfenbrenner's theory. This, the next time we see you on Thursday, it will be very important for you to come prepared, please, and come ready to engage. I don't think that that will be a problem because we are all really engaged and it's wonderful. A really effective system we have going here. But what we would really like you to do is pay attention to this, because we are basically modeling the process, what will be required of you for your assignment task. So the more you come prepared and engaged, you're already preparing for the assignment. The more you practice the skill of applying theory to a case study, you are also getting prepared for the assignment. So hopefully we can break down the stress of the assignment. And there were a few queries. By the end of the week, we will be uploading assignment videos. But please, for now, just try understand the theory, engage with it very much like what you've been doing in the session today, and let's apply it to a case study and we can have a really great discussion. Okay. Any last thoughts? I think we have literally 1 minute, if I'm correct. Webinar host, do we have 1 minute left? Or
1 minute.
Okay, 1 minute. Okay, anything for 1 minute? Okay, please can we also, Matthiam, please can we save the chat? We will come to some of that, but thank you so much, students. Excellent, thank you. Any final comments that we have? Okay, well, in the last minute, I'd like to take the time just to say once again how wonderful it is to have such great interactions with you. I think I've said it now 100 times, but I'm very impressed, and I'm really just looking forward to the assignments, because if we are already doing this before we have even finished, then I'm really looking forward to seeing where you can come. And what is sending us off, you saved by the drill, not by the bell. But thank you so much to my colleagues, Mrs. Kasim and Mrs. Padiachi, for reading the responses and sharing their thoughts. And thank you to our host. And once again, thank you to students. Please keep coming back. Please keep up the active reflections and critical engagement. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tasneem. Bye. Have a good day, everybody.